Let's begin now on Daf Tes, and we're up to Inami, which you'll see approximately 10 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Now, just to take off on this sugya, we had a statement of Levi that there's one case of an erva that's left out of our Mishnah, and the number should not be 15, but rather 16. And that's the case of Anusas Aviv. And Rebbe says very harshly, where's your brain? The reason why Anusas Aviv is omitted from our Mishnah is because it is the subject of a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. So let's read the Gemara inside. The Gemara says, Amalei Levi leRebbe, my area de Tani Tesvav, listening Tezayit. Why is it that the Mishnah stops at the number 15? Why not include a 16th category? Amalei, so Rebbe responds, Kimeduna li she'en lo moach b'kodkoda. They ask such a question, something's missing. I guess we'd say in our parlance, a screw is missing. My datcha, what do you think is missing from our Mishnah? And the answer is, Imo anusas aviv. Not a case of Imo, where his father had a marriage relationship with a woman, and it was a full-fledged marriage relationship, but rather it was a case of anusas aviv. So just to review very quickly what we said 2 days ago, Yaakov had an ones relationship with Leah, from which Reuven was born. And Shimon married Leah, who is Anusas Aviv. And we're holding now that Anusas Aviv is muteres. You're not allowed to marry the wife of your father, but you're allowed to marry a woman who was victimized by your father. And Shimon had another wife. Now Shimon dies without children. His 2 wives fall in front of Reuven for Yibur. But if you remember, Reuven was the product that was born of that rape relationship. And therefore, Leah is Imo. Hare Leah hi Imo shel Hayavam Reuven. Ptura michalitza upoteres gam es saratzarosa. Now, this possible scenario could only be plausible according to the sheet of the Rabbanan. And that's what Rebbe points out to Levi. Imo anusas aviv bipluta de Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanan. And he tells you here, this is the Gemara later on in Daf Tzadi Zayin. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not possible that Shimon could have been married to Leah because Leah is Anusas Aviv, and Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that that a man is not allowed to marry Anusas Aviv. So this whole scenario is impossible according to Rabbi Yehuda. There's no mitzius of Anusas Imo to pater up at Sarah, because Shimon, the brother that died, was not allowed to marry Leah, meaning his father's victim. I use that word. So therefore, your case, Levi, could only work according to the Rabbanan. And beplukta lo kamayr. Our Mishnah listing 15 arayos is limited to those arayos that are universally and unanimously accepted as arayos. So that our Mishnah could be reconciled with every single Tana. There's no Tana who would object to any of the 15 arayos listed in our Mishnah. But in your case, Anusas Imo, then Rabbi Yehuda would object because there is no Metzius of Anusas Imo. And the rest of the sugya that we're about to learn is an attempt by the Gemara to try to prove that what is incorporated in the Mishnah in many different occasions, as we'll see, is totally biplukta. For example, velo, are we not interested in a machlokes? The Mishnah later on in Daf Chav establishes that in the cases of Isur Mitzvah and Isur Kedusha, Chalitza is a requirement without evil. And we're going to see soon that according to Rabbi Akiva, there would not be a requirement of Chalitza at all in these cases. So what are these cases of Isur Mitzvah and Isur Kedusha? Isur Mitzvah, the Gemara says later on in Daf Chav, is Shnios Larayos. And we'll soon see a case of Aim Imo. So in the case of Shnios, we have an Isur D'Rabbanan. And because of that Isur D'Rabbanan, there's no Yibum, but there's Chalitza. Then we have something called Isur Kedusha. And Isur Kedusha is D'Oraisa, like the case of Mamzeres. So if a Mamzeres falls for Yibum, there's no Yibum. There's Chalitza. That's called Isur Kedusha. So, for example, Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Shimon was married to a Mamzeres. Shimon died. This Mamzeres falls for Yibum to Reuven. And there's no Yibum, but there is Chalitza. And that's against Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that there's no difference between Chayve Kares and Chayve Lavin, which means that your definition of Erva, according to Rabbi Akiva, expands beyond the limits of Chayve Krisus to include even Chayve Lavin. So that a Mamzeres, which is Chayve Lavim and not Chayve Krisus, according to Rabbi Akiva, would be completely excluded both from Yibum and Chalitza. Why? Because according to Rabbi Akiva, there's no Tfisas Kedushin in Chayve Lavim. If a man marries a Mamzeres, the Torah doesn't recognize and validate that marriage. Because Chayve Lavim, like Chayve Krisus, fit into the definition, the category of an Erva, and Ein Kedushin Tovsim Arayos. Therefore, when this Mamzeres, the wife of Shimon, falls for Yibum in front of Reuven, since Reuven could not possibly consummate marriage with this Mamzeres, because according to Rabbi Akiva, Chayve Lavim equals Chayve Krisus, Erva, the Ein Kedushin Tovsim Bahem, then there's no Zika. There cannot be a Zika in a case of an Erva, because there's no Tfisas Kedushin in Erva. So I understand if a man marries his sister, that's not a valid marriage. But if a man marries a Mamzeres, it would be a valid marriage according to the Rabbanan of Rabbi Akiva, but not according to Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva equates Chayve Lavin with Chayve Krisus. It's not the chumras havera that generates the shame erva, but just the bios asuros. Any biasura, according to Rabbi Akiva, fits in the category of erva and ein kedushin tofs. Therefore, there could not possibly be a zika. And you could go even a step further. According to Rabbi Akiva, Shimon was never legally married to this mamzeres because the Torah doesn't recognize that marriage. And therefore, she's not his wife. And when Shimon dies, she doesn't fall for evil. So therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, in the case of Chayvei Lavin, which is called Isur Kedusha, is Pturos min ha'yibum u min ha'chalitza. There won't be any chalitza as well, because there is no zikas yibum. And therefore, the Mishnah of Isur Kedusha on Daf Chaf could only, and that requires chalitza, could only be reconciled with the sheet of the Chachamim, but not with Rabbi Akiva. So we see that the Mishnah beplugta kamayri. More answers, you know what Rebbe had in mind? We went too far. Rebbe didn't go that far. Bepirkin kamrina. In the first parak of Masechet Yevamot, beplugta lo kamayri. Daf Chaf, that Mishnah is already in the second parak. There, the Mishnah goes into many, many different shitos and codifies a particular shita of the Rabbanon, of the Rov, against the Mid. Now, honestly, I don't know why, maybe you know, there's a difference between the first parak of Yevamot and the balance of Yevamot. Why is it that with regard to the first parak, beplugta lo kamayri, with regard to the balance of Masechet Yevamot, beplugta mayri? Maybe it's just a way in which Rebbe taught Mishnayos. He first went through the basic fundamental dinim, and then he got into the more complex dinim. So the dinim that are incorporated into the first parak, which are serving as the introduction. You know, when you introduce a Masechta, you move min hakal el hachom. In any event, that's what the Gemara says. Now the Gemara wants to prove from a Mishnah in the first parak that beplugta kamayri. V'ha Beit Shammai matirin es hatzoros li'achim u'beis Hillel osrim. Our Mishnah at the beginning of Yevamot postulates that tzaras erva does not fall for evil. That's against Beis Shammai, because the Mishnah is going to quote Beit Shammai, matirin hatzoros li'achim, which means that the tzoros of an erva fall for yibum to the brothers. Beis Hillel. So Beit Shammai never accepted the p'tur of tzara. You know, they had another limud, yalfusaf, to the word litzra. Therefore, the entire p'tur of tzara from yibum, which is so basic in our Mishnah at the beginning of Masechet Yevamot, is a reflection of the Shita Beis Hillel, who accepted the p'tur of tzaras erva. But Beit Shammai never accepted that opinion. So how could our Mishnah make a flat statement, a claim that tzaras erva does not fall for evil? And the Gemara answers, Beit Shammai v'mokum Beis Hillel eino Mishnah. The Gemara flexes a principle. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this principle appears in many sugyas of Shas, such as the, what is that, a Yud? Yeah, he quotes brachas and beitza. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in many other Masechtas as well. So Beit Shammai v'mokum Beis Hillel eino Mishnah. We study Beit Shammai because it's a chefza shel Torah, and we have to understand the Torah, and we have to understand the dissenting view of Beit Shammai, but in halacha we don't consider Beit Shammai. So therefore, as far as those Tanoim who have a plukta, the Mishnah will omit any halacha in the first parak. I mean, any halacha that depends upon that achlokes, if the two members of the argument are both Tanoim whose opinion weighs heavily. But if it's a machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, Beis Hillel shita the rules dominates, and Beit Shammai shita is Eino Mishnah. But I'm just emphasizing it. We shouldn't misinterpret that Eino Mishnah means that it's not a Chefetz Shel Torah. Eino Mishnah means la'halacha, we will reject Beit Shammai in light of Beis Hillel. That's the halachic rule. Machlokas Beis Hillel Beit Shammai, halacha ke Beis Hillel. So therefore, when we talk about Beplukta Mairi or Beplukta Lo Kamairi, we're talking about how to paskin la'halacha, and our Mishnah and the entire first parak, the way Rebbe organized it, is going to present the fundamentals that are universally accepted in halacha. You'll tell me Beit Shammai disagree. Beit Shammai Moko Beis Hillel Eino Mishnah. Now let's go back to our Mishnah for a moment. The Mishnah, it's a very long Mishnah if you remember, has on the top of Daf Beis Amud Beis, Eishes Achiv Shlo Haya Be'olamo. So what's the case? I'm just going to read to you the Masifta back on the Mishnah. We've done this in the past, but it's kedai to do it again. Meis ha'ach kodem shenolad hayavam. Ruvain dies before Shimon is born. And therefore, there's no mitzvah of Yibum. And if there's no mitzvah of Yibum, then there's an Isur Eishes Ach. So the only time that the mitzvah of Yibum applies is Dafka Shahaya A'ach HaMes V'Yavam Bizman Echad Ba'olam. There was one day or 1 minute of time that Reuben and Shimon shared this world. They were both alive. If the Yavam, let's call him Shimon, was born after Reuben already died, Eina Misyabemes Lo. There's no Yibum. Shenemar Ki Yeshu Achim Yachdav Umeis Echad Mehem Uben Elo Yevamot Yavo Eleh. So we're talking about Achim Be'olam Echad, right? Ki Yeshu Achim Yachdav. Yeshiva Achas Ba'olam. Now he has another paragraph here that I want to read to you. Im hayu shnei achim yachdav ba'olam, Reuven and Shimon are alive together. V'nasa Reuven es Sarah. Umes below banim v'akach nolad Levi achem ashlishi. So what it means is that although Levi was not alive at any moment during the lifetime of Reuven, however, he was alive at the time of Shimon. Now, Shimon went ahead and he was miyabim Sarah Ashes Reuven. Right? Because Shimon and Reuven were alive together at the same time. Now, Levi does not have the option of Yibum with Sarah, the wife of Reuven, because Levi was born after Reuven's death. Now, Yibma Shimon went ahead and he was Miyabnim Ashes Reuven, that's Sarah, because Shimon and Reuven lived together at the same time. And now Shimon married another woman by the name of Rivka. And then Shimon dies without children. Now, in this case, Shimon and Levi were alive together. So when Shimon dies, we would have anticipated logically that Shimon's two wives would fall for Yibum to Levi. Both wives of Shimon are excluded from Yibum to Levi. Sarah, the very moment that Reuven was born after Shimon's death, this woman, Sarah, becomes Eshes Ach as an erva to Levi. Sharei b'misas Reuven lo haisa lo ba Mrs. Yibur mishum shelo haya Reuven ames be'olamo shel Levi hayava. So since Levi and Reuven were not alive at the same time, therefore mishum kach din ervas Eshes Ach sheba ukidin kol arayos hashnuyos mishnaseinu hapochos miyibur. Eshes Ach is an erva no less than all the other ervas, the other 14 arayos, and therefore Tura miyibur. Now again, there's a Gavaldic Chiddush here because Shimon married Sarah after the death of Reuven, and at that moment in time, Shimon, if you look at it logically, steps into the shoes of Reuven. He was Mekayim the mitzvah of Yibum vis-a-vis Reuven's wife. Once he's Mekayim in the mitzvah of Yibum, then forget about Eshes Achiv. That's ancient history. The fact that Sarah was married to Reuven should be irrelevant because now that marriage was, what word should I use, was bequeathed to the next generation, the Yibum generation, so to speak, and Shimon, in fact, implemented Yibum. So why not start from scratch now? Yeah, the woman is Eshes Achiv of Levi, but only because she's married now to Shimon, and Shimon dies. There's a mitzvah Yibum for Levi to be Miyabim, the wife of Shimon. But he says that since at the moment that Levi was born, then the Yibum of Shimon to Leah I'm sorry, we called her Sarah. I get confused here with names, sorry. But it's irrelevant, right? So now, the Yibum of Shimon does not undermine the status of Sarah, he calls her Sarah, as Eshes Achiv of Reuven. We cannot simply jump and erase the past. Why? Because the moment that Levi was born, at that moment in time, Sarah's status vis-a-vis Levi was that of Ashes Achid. So Shimon's Yibum is a separate category. It's a whole new history, but it doesn't remove or undermine the original history that when Levi emerged in this world, she, Sarah, was Ashes Achiv of Reuven. That's engraved in stone. That can never be removed. Umishum kach din ervas Ashes achshavo kedin kol harayas hashnus mitchasenu hapochos miyibum v'af Rivka sarasa tura miyibum v'chalitza shalevi. Became Saras ervas Ashes ach shalom makom mitzvah is ptura min hayibum min hachalitza. So that's what we have back in the Mishnah. And the question now is, in light of Rebbe's principle, that in this parak, the Pluta Loka Mairi, is that really so? And the problem is here on the top of Daf Tesamid Beis, the Pligi Rabbi Shimon V'Rabban. Now, obviously, we're going to have to analyze Rabbi Shimon and see why the Mishnah contradicts Rabbi Shimon. But I think the first question on the agenda, if we're going to analyze Rabbi Shimon, is the following. Does Rabbi Shimon completely reject the category of Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo? It just doesn't exist. And Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo is included in Zikas Yibum and in Mitzvahs Yibum like two brothers who are alive at the same time. Is Rav Shimon completely oblivious to that? I mean, it says Ki Yeshvu Achim Yachdav, as I state in Pasuk. He can't deny the Pasuk. And yet the Gemara says the Pligi Rav Shimon V'Rabbanan Uketani. The Mishnah has Ashes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, as we saw in that Beis on the top line. And not only does she not fall for Yibum to Levi, so that now when Shimon dies without children, and he leaves Sarah plus Rivka, the Mishnah says that Levi is not miyamin neither Sarah nor Rivka, because the status of Sarah vis-a-vis Levi is Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, Ashes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo. And we're going to try to prove that Rabbi Shimon would hold that in this case there is Yibum, despite the fact that Levi was not alive at the time of Reuven. There will be Yibum. Now, at this point, we're back, just for the record, I mean, that's not what we're going to focus our attention on, but just to make a cheshbon of where we're up to, at this particular juncture, on the top of the Avtasim Beis, we're back to Levi's contention as to why Anusas, right, Imo Anusaso, Anusas Aviv, was omitted from our Mishnah. You can't tell me because Bepluta Lo Kamairi, because our Mishnah says, Ashes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, Pat is up the Tzara, there's no Yibum, and even the Tzara is not Yibum. And that statement is against Rav Shimon. Meaning that if the Mishnah records Eishes Achim Shel Lama against the Shita of Rabbi Shimon, the Mishnah, says Levi, logically should have quoted the halacha of Anusas Aviv, which is against Rabbi Yehuda. That's just to keep a cheshbon of where we're up to. So the Gemara answers, "V'nolad ulavasof yibem lo polig Rabbi Shimon." Now, on those words, you have a whole page of Rashi. But I'm going to cheat a little bit. I want to get to the punchline. So I'm going to read to you the Masifta. I think, John, you said you have the Masifta, right? Yeah. So if you have the Masifta, it's on page Tesam and Beis, the major paragraph on the right side. Yesh ofen sha'af Rabbi Shimon moder lidin Mishnah. So the thrust of the Gemara's answer, just to get the technicality, is that if I can find one case, one scenario where Rabbi Shimon admits to the law of the Mishnah, meaning that Eishes Achim Shel Lama is out of Yibum and Patas the Tzara, then that justifies our principle of Biplut Lo Kamairi, because then we're going to say that our Mishnah Eishes Olamo, Eishes Achim Shel Lama, is referring to that particular scenario, which Rabbi Shimon admits is Yibum is out, and therefore the Tzara is the Tzara's error. So our job now is to figure out under what circumstances, in what scenario does Rabbi Shimon agree to the halacha of Eishes Achiv Shel Lama. So let's go through. He has here two scenarios, one in which Rabbi Shimon rejects the Chachamim, and one in which he accepts the principle of Eishes Achiv Shel Lama. What is the case where they argue, where Rabbi Shimon rejects the Chachamim? Nolad ha'ach hashlishi li'achar ha'yibum shel nefila rishon. Meaning, when you have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, you have two nefilos. You have the nefila to Shimon when Reuven died, and then if Shimon, after his yibum, dies without children, you can have a second nefila to Levi. When was Levi born? That's the key question. So in the first case that we're going to discuss, Levi was born after the Nefila Rishon. Kigon, Reuven v'Shimon Achim, Nasa Reuven es Sarah, Umes Reuven below Ban. So again, Reuven married Sarah. Reuven dies without children. Is Nafla Sarah, Ishto Shel Reuven, Lifnei Shimon, Liyibu, Yibem Shimon es Sarah. Mazel tov. Shimon was Mekayim the mitzvah of Yibum. And again, Shimon is married to another woman as well. Besides Sarah, he has a wife, Rivka. The Achakach Nolad Ach Levi. And Levi, the third brother, was born after Shimon consummated Yibum with Sarah. Nimtza, it comes out that at the moment that Levi was born, Matzah Sarah Nesua L'Shimon. Happy birthday, your first birthday. And Shimon is married to Sarah. Now Shimon and Levi are hayu bolama. They're below bolamachas. Yesh yakim yachta. Beis kam Shimon below banin. Naflu noshav lifnei Levi liyibo. Right. So we said that Shimon was miyabim Sarah. Shimon was miyabim Sarah, and he was married to another woman as well, Rivka. He says, "Rak biofen zeh Rabbi Shimon cholek al chachamim v'sover shekevet shebishoshan olad Levi kvar nisyabma Sarah l'Shimon paka mimena zikas yibum shahaisa oleh v'misas Reuben." Whatever Zika was generated at the moment of Reuven's death, it's completely gone as far as Levi is concerned. There is no relationship, ein kesher v'chibur klal, bein Zikas Reuven levein Levi. That Zika, which normally is connected or projected onto all the Achim, has no impact whatsoever on Levi. Levi is not related, kihu zeh, he's not connected at all to the Zika that was generated with the death of Reuven. Im Cain, therefore, Kishenofeles lifnei Levi liyibum achrei misas Shimon. Second. Just want to read one more line. Im Cain Kishenofeles lifnei Levi liyibum. So what's the Chiddush of Reb Shimon? The Chiddush of Reb Shimon in coarse terms, meaning without getting into the nuances, is that there's no Zika from Reuven projected onto Levi. And the reason for that is because before Levi entered into this world, Shimon had already been miyabim Eshes Reuven. We call that Sarah. So that when Levi is born, the Mitzias Bashetach, as they say here in Israel, is that his brother Shimon, with whom he shares the Olam, is married to Sarah. So when Shimon dies, according to Rabbi Shimon, Levi will be miyabim any of the two wives of Shimon. It's his choice, his pick. He can marry and be mekayim the mitzvah even with Sarah. Sarah was Eshes Reuven, and there was never a possibility, a heter of yibum to Levi as far as Eshes Reuven is concerned, because they didn't live in the same world. That's irrelevant. Why? Because Shimon and his marriage, his yibum to Sarah, creates a whole new ballgame. Forget about Reuven. The Zikas yibum for Levi is now generated by the fact that Shimon and Levi are Olam Achas, and now Sarah, who's the wife of Shimon, is Kuka to Levi. There's a Zika to Levi. So once again, just to summarize, the reason why Reb Shimon disagrees with the Chachamim is because Shimon was miyabem, what's her name? Sarah, before the birth of Levi. Levi comes into this world with in a new generation. He's not part of the old generation because he was never alive at the time of Reuben. So now we're going to talk about another case of Eishes Achiv Shalahay Bolomo, where even Rabbi Shimon would be modeh that there's no Yid. Avol be nolad, if Levi was born Ulebasof Yiben, there's some words missing here. We'll fill in the words, right? Ulebasof Yiben means that Shimon was miyabem after the Leda of Levi. So it means that Reuven was born in that window of time after the death of Reuven, but before the Yibum of Eishes, Reuven will call a Sarah to Shimon. So here's a situation where, as far as Levi is concerned, when he looks at the world after he pops his head out into the world, what he's looking at is Eishes Achiv, meaning Sarah is the wife of his brother Reuven, all of a sudden. That's what he sees in his relationship to Sarah the moment he enters into this world. We can no longer, according again, this is the logic of Eishes Achiv Shalom Olama, we can no longer be matir the Zika for Levi or to Levi because Levi is not in the parsha of Yibum. And Reb Shimon agrees to this. Moder Reb Shimon, again reading the Masechet, says, She'emes Shimon below Banim, Eino Misyabemes L'Levi. Sharei Kishenolad Adayin Lo Hisyabma L'Shimon. Adayin Hi Haisa Tachas Zikas Reuven. Until the Yibum of Shimon, Sarah is a Zkuka by virtue of the marriage to Reuven. Reuven's dead already, but that's the way Zika works. The Torah is Machadesh, that when a man dies without children, and he has brother, certainly more brothers, then his marriage, so to speak, continues posthumously. Reuven is almost alive, and Sarah is his wife, even though Reuven is never 6 feet under, it doesn't matter. The whole Nesra Olav Benefila Rishona May Reuven, Bishum Shalevi Lohaya Bolamo Shal Reuven, Harei Asura Olav Af Benefila Shnia Shemach Shimon, Vim Kain Yesh Lahamid Es Mishnasenu, How Seres Eishus Ach Shalom Makom Olam Bofen Zeh. The Mishnah could stim with Rabbi Shimon as well, if we assume that the Mishnah is talking about a case where Levi was born in that window between the death of Reuven and the Yibum of Shimon to the wife of Reuven. If that period of time was the period of Ledas Levi, we have to go through the birth certificate here and see when his date of birth is, then everybody, even Reb Shimon agrees, this is a case of the Erev of Eishes Ach, meaning this is Achiv Shelo Hayav Olam. Of a Zika, which cannot lend itself to the mitzvah of Yibum. So as far as Shimon is concerned, everything's perfect, hunky-dory. Let Shimon go ahead and marry Sarah, be Mekayim in the mitzvah of Yibum. That's exactly what he's going to do. But that's not relevant to Levi, because Levi was in an impossible situation as far as Yibum is concerned. On the one hand, there was a Zikas Yibum, and that was Chai B'Kayim. But on the other hand, Levi, insofar as he wasn't Yechvu Achim Yachtov, could not implement the mitzvah of Yibum. And if that be the case, if there's no possibility of Yibum, then Sarah goes back to the status of Eishes Achiv without a heter Yibum, and therefore she patters up her Sarah as well. She is in error. And our Mishnah can be reconciled with Reb Shimon if we interpret our Mishnah as referring to that case. If, on the other hand, it was a scenario in which Levi was born after the Yibum of Shimon, then according to Rabbi Shimon the Tana, with the death of Shimon, Levi will be miyabim Eishes Shimon Sarah, despite the fact that she was also Eishes Reuben, because now with the marriage of Shimon to what do we call her? Sarah, we called her, right? With that marriage, the Zika of Reuven is completely gone. And now when Shimon dies, there's a brand new Zika replacing the original one, and that's Zika Shimon. But Shimon and Levi were alive at the same time. They shared a lomo, and therefore Levi will be beyond Sarah. I mean, what fascinates me in my mind about Rabbi Shimon, I don't know if this bothers anybody else but me, is that when you want to talk about the relationship between Levi and Sarah, and you want to ask the question whether she's an erva to Levi or she's not an erva to Levi. I mean, that seems to be a black and white question. It's not contingent on any factors. It's a question about the relationship between a man and a woman. Does the Torah see that relationship as anti-gravitational? It goes in the opposite direction. But again, all of Masechet Yevamot is about the fact that a woman who is Eishes Ach, which would be an erva, now the Torah in a situation of Yibum removes the Yitzer erva and tells you have a mitzvah to marry him. So I guess my initial discomfiture with this whole sugya of Shimon is not valid, because in the case that Levi was born after Shimon was Makai in the midst of Yibum with Sarah, then we have a whole new ballgame here. The Zikas Yibum that would have generated some Issa to Levi as a result of Reuven's marriage to Sarah is ancient history. It's wiped off the record. Why? Because Shimon was Miyaben Sarah. And now Levi is born, and what he's looking at is Sarah Eishes Shimon. With regard to Sarah Eishes Shimon, since Levi and Shimon are Bolam Achas, therefore we have a mitzvah. Again, if we get to Daf Chaf, Eretz Hashem, we'll have to go through this again and again and again. But for our purposes here on Daf Tes, the Gemara claims that we can reconcile the Mishnah of Eishes Achar Shalahai B'Olam at the beginning of Masechet Yevamot with Rabbi Shimon, but only in a case where Levi was born after Shimon had already consummated the Yibum with Sarah. Next kasha. For Amar of Oshia. So wait a minute. So everything that we presented until now, that Rabbi Shimon accepts the principle of Eishes Achim Shalachai B'Olamo, and therefore will apply that in the case where Shimon was Miyabim Eishes Reuven Sarah before Levi was born. That's according to the Stomach of the Gemara, the anonymous Gemara. Rav Oshia never accepted it. Rav Oshia understood Rabbi Shimon in a much more radical way. Rav Oshia Cholakay Rav Shimon Af Barishona. Rabbi Shimon completely rejected the category of Eishes Ach Shalohay Bolam. What that means is that let's imagine a case where Shimon, let's go back, where Levi was born, and then Shimon was miyabein Sarah. Just 1 second. Wait a minute. So Kodem Shenolad Levi. Shimon right? And after Levi was born, then Shimon was miyabim. Oh, so we said that in that case, even Reb Shimon would agree that it's Eishes Achim Shalahai Belam, right? Let's just go over one more time. Sorry. The Zikas Yibum from Ruvain now generates an Isa of Eishes Ach vis-a-vis Levi, because Shimon has not yet been miyabim, and Levi's already in the world. So at the world from the perspective of Levi now has Sarah as Eishes Achiv of Ruvain, which and Shalom B'Makom because they weren't Yeshuach and Yaakov. And we said that even in that case, even Reb Shimon agrees that her status, Sarah's status vis-a-vis Levi, is an Eishes Ach. No, says Rav Oshia, even in that case, Reb Shimon is matir Levi to be miyabim Sarah when Shimon dies without any children. So again, Levi was born after the death of Ruvain. Shimon went ahead, he was miyabim Sarah, Eishes Ruvain. Levi will be miyabim Sarah with the death of Shimon. Basically, it means that Reb Shimon rejected the entire concept of Eishes Achiv Shalohay B'Olam. The Imkein Mishnah Seinu, Hoseres Eishes Ach Shalohay B'Olam, Eina Misyachsheves B'Shum Ofen Emshitas Reb Shimon. There is no case in which Reb Shimon, according to Rav Oshia, recognizes the P'tur Yibum of Eishes Achiv Shalohay B'Olam. Where answers Hayitosiv Rabbi Yoshi. So again, this is sugi later on in Daf Tes, and the Gemara quotes a brisa that completely, explicitly contradicts Rav Oshia, and we basically shelved Rav Oshia. So we don't have to be worried about Rav Oshia. Okay. We don't have that much time, but what I'd like to spend 2 or 3 minutes just introducing the next case, which the Gemara is going to claim is dependent upon a plugta, and yet it's codified in the Mishnah. And this case is going to come up in a sugya Naf Chaf Vav. You've got 4 brothers in this case, and 2 out of the 4 are married to 2 sisters. right? So let's say Reuben and Shimon are respectively married to Rachel and Leah that are sisters. And the other two brothers are neutral, so to speak. Now Reuben and Shimon die without children. Would there be Yibum in this case? So this is the case that's called Achos Zikukasa. Why? Because since Reuben and Shimon both died, each leaving a Zikas Yibum to both Rachel and Leah respectively, then Rachel and Leah are two sisters that share the same Zika, so to speak. Meaning, vis-a-vis the other brothers, they have a Zika to both Reuben's wife Leah and Shimon's wife Rachel. So any of those other brothers is in a position of whichever woman falls for Yibam is Achos Kukasa, because the other sister also fell for Yibam. And in such a case, the Mishnah paskins later on in Chavav that Choletzes v'yena misyabemus, that Achos Kukaso is in that middle state that we spoke about, like with regard to Chai V'yesei, where there's no possibility of Yibum, because if you're going to be Yavim or you're being Yavim Achos Kukaso, but Chalitza she requires. Hatam, Bishum shel shtei ha'achios yesh zikas Yibum le'yavamim, v'nimtza kol achas ha'achayos, higam achos zekukaso, v'asru chachamim al adam achos kukaso, mishum she doma lachos ishta. So we now have a gzera, so to speak, equating achos kukaso with achos ishta. That's all gzera d'Rabbanan. And then the Mishnah says, Im haisa achas mea achios, asura al echad min ha'achim be'isur erva. In other words, in addition to being achos kukaso, she's also an erva. Harehu asur rak ba umuter b'achosa. For some reason, we're going to completely remove this D'Rabbanan called Achos Kukaso, because one of the two women is an Erva. And the logic is very compelling. Evan che Erva poteres michalitz v'yibum, shuv ein hize Kukaso. Umemela af achosa ina achos Kukaso. Aval ha'ach hasheni ose b'shteihem, sheshteihem kukos lo l'chalitza. So vis-a-vis, let's call him Levi, since one of these two women, either Rachel or Leah, is Imo or Achoso, whatever it is, one of the Aronis. Therefore, Levi could be Miyavim, the other woman. She's no longer Achos Kukaso because one of these two ladies is an Aaron, there's no Zika. But as far as Yisachar, who comes next? Yehuda, as far as Yehuda is concerned, he cannot be Miyavim either of these two women. He doesn't have the head to the luxury that his brother Levi has, because as far as Yehuda is concerned, both these women are Zkukala. Neither of them is an Erva. And we'll just end up with one more line over here, because then we're ready for the Sugya Mitzvah tomorrow. V'im haisa ha'achas asura al echad achim b'yisar erev poko zika zakasa mimeno v'achosa asura v'oso Yisrael achas sheni. All right, so we'll pick that up tomorrow. That's much more complicated. Okay then? Thank you very much. Have a great day.